So today, I believe we're talking about the residential listing agreement. Is that correct? Is that what it says on the calendar? Yes. We're probably not going to talk about EXP's residential listing agreement because it may be done at a later time. But we're going to go through the California Association of Realtors residential listing agreement. For those of you that don't have one, I've pasted a sample into the chat so you can, sample along. And what we're going to do is let's start at the beginning. How about that? All right. So in order for this to work, number one, you need to be able to log in to car.org. Number one. Number two, you need to know how to get from car.org into transactions. That would all help. You would want to create templates, and a template should be one for buyers and one for sellers. At least you can see I got a whole bunch of templates. So what would I have in a listing template? If you click on it, not very much. I don't even have a listing agreement, and that's because the forms have changed since then. But what I should have are parties. Now, the parties that I have in my listing template are simply me as the listing agent and broker, my license number, my email, my cell phone, why not? EXP's name, the name of your EXP brokerage, which could be EXP Realty of California, could be EXP Realty of Northern California, could be EXP Realty of Greater Los Angeles, could be EXP Realty of Southern California. And you would need the license number. Now, those of you that are on my team, I've shared, and it's on Workplace, a step-by-step guide on what to do once you're at EXP, and included in that is a briefcase for each of the different regions, which have the name of the broker, which you're not going to actually need. You don't need to say Deborah Penny, who would be the name of the broker for EXP Realty of California. They don't ask that on any of the forms. You just need this: the name of the brokerage, the broker's license number, and the address, which would be the address of the corporate office. Let's assume you've done that. Now, if you've done that, it means you don't have to do it every time you take a listing. Okay, how about that? That's the reason why you want to create a template. By the way, you also should create a buyer template that has the selling agent. And I get asked this question a lot: isn't the selling agent the listing agent? No, the selling agent is the buyer's agent. The seller's agent is the listing agent. But if you were doing a buyer template, you would then put in all the parties for the buyer side, which would be your name, your DRE number, you get your email, and the broker. Is everybody with me? If you do that, everything will go a lot smoother, a lot smoother. Apparently, I have a lot of activity. So what would we do if we were going to create a listing? We would go to new transaction, and we would click on new listing. You're probably thinking, boy, I'm glad I didn't miss this class. Right now, what I would do for the name is I usually put the beginning of the address, 123 Greenwood, right? It doesn't have to be any more than that. Here, just a second. It doesn't have to be any more than that. Let me check something for a second. All right. So then I would put in the complete address of the property, 123 Greenwood, Morgan Hillbilly. All right, pretty good. Notice it says zip form record connect. This is useful. Now, it's not going to be useful right now because I just made up, an address. But let's say I had a real address. If I click this box, what it's going to do is it's going to find in the public records information about the property tax information. So the only two ways of importing who's the owner and what's the APN number, blah, 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 is to either do it through RPR. And if you go into RPR and you pull up a listing, which you should have done because you're doing a CMA before you do, before you sign the listing, in RPR, you can see on the right-hand side that there's, if you drop down a little thing that says lone wolf, there's the wolf howling, zip forms, and you can create a transaction or import from RPR into the transaction, right? It's not perfect. This works better, right? It works better. So if we click on it, again, I don't have a real address. It would be importing the information because we'd like to fill it out. We say it's residential. We pick the appropriate template. Here, I mean, why don't I do that? I could have done Hillview. That's a real property. But anyhow, let me find the right one. I have lots of them. So let's say I would pick my EXP listing template. I'm not going to write in anything about comments because who's going to read them? And I don't put in an image because who's going to see it? And I click on save. And here it is, right? And I don't really want it to save the address. Now I go to documents. Now in my template, I could have thrown in the residential listing agreement. Notice all of these forms that appear here, right? And if I did it over again, I wouldn't include them all. So if I were doing it today, I would most likely just include the residential listing agreement. But what all of this is, if you're wondering what is all these other forms, that was a list of all the other disclosures and things that we're going to need if we're going to list a house. Now, we don't need it now. My suggestion is, if you're on a listing appointment and they seem happy with you and they're ready to sign the listing, sign the listing. If you're there physically, get out of the house. Get them to sign, get out. Don't send them all the other forms. Not until they've signed the listing. Don't say, well, here's the listing agreement and the transfer disclosure statement and this other property questionnaire and don't do that. Because it's likely to discourage them, and then you'll hear, well, we've been thinking about it. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, right? Sign the listing. Now, eventually, we're going to need to do all this other stuff, and there's more, right? Since I made my template, they've actually added more. What I do is I let Rob, the transaction coordinator, put together, because she's got a checklist, and add them. The only one here that you need at this time is the residential listing agreement. That's the only one you really need. Right? We'll add forms later. So we click on the box. Now, one of the things that I didn't do, and I didn't do it just to demonstrate why I should have done it, is, no, I don't want to save the changes. The thing that I didn't do, and if I had used that Connect program, it would have imported the names of the seller and some other information about the property. But since I didn't do that, what I need to do is I need to add the seller's information. Everyone that's going to sign, we need to add them. Now, notice address book is a choice. What address book? Well, if you've already added them as a party to the transaction, they're there. If you've added them as a zip form contact, they're there. But notice among the choices are Google Contacts. And I guess Microsoft, if anybody uses Microsoft. There are others. We don't care about Yahoo. I don't care, at least. So if your seller or sellers, you've gone to the trouble of setting them up as a Google contact, you could just import them, right? And I'm going to just pick on somebody. I have to be careful. But do I really want to pick on somebody? How about this? I'm not going to do it. So let's say the seller's name is Sue, and we want the name, we want their email. Um, and EXP would like their phone number. We know what their we don't need all this other stuff, right? We don't need their home address if it's not the same property. We don't really need that, right? Why does EXP prefer that you tell them the seller's phone number? Because, well, during COVID, they had some listing agents that were in the hospital, and the EXP had no way of connecting with the seller because they didn't know the seller's phone number, right? So hopefully this won't come up, but it wouldn't kill you to put it in. And then sky slope, whatever. Signing representative would be, what if the seller is a trust for homes that's more common, or an LLC? Then what you would do, and this looks weird, but you would say super person trust, right? Would be the name you put in, and first, middle, last. I split it up because I got, health issues, mental issues, but I split it up. If it's an LLC, I split it up so that there's a few words. It all runs together anyhow. And then down here, I would say that's the name. And then I would put in their email address. Usually the entity does not have an email address, but the signer does. Does everybody get that? If the seller is a trust or an LLC, then that's what goes in where it says name of seller. But then you need a human or superhuman to actually sign the documents, and that person would go here. Any questions about that? Peachy. So we're going to leave it like this. So we've now got our seller, we've got me, we've got forms galore, and we're ready to do it, right? So we open it up. Now this is being recorded. You know, we're going to help you with this. If you're on my team and you have a listing, in the what to do step-by-step guide, once you've joined EXP, there's a section about listings. I've increased some of the links and things there. It tells you what to do, how to do a CMA, all this kind of stuff. And there's a form that you can fill out where our transaction coordinator, Ra, would help you do this. But we're going to click on the box that says seller. Notice it's put in my information. This is just, something to read if you have insomnia. The date prepared does not have to be the date that they're signing. It doesn't have to be. It's the date prepared. I've heard agents say, I was told that the date prepared has to be the date that people sign, or it's not a valid contract. That ain't so, right? Not true. This is the date prepared. Why is it important? Because later, if we make a modification of terms or an extension of time and those addendums, all of those other addendums are going to want to refer to the RLA, the residential listing agreement, date prepared. Now we look at this, it left off the county. Now, if I had done that connect thing, it would have imported this, but I didn't because I didn't have a real address. It would have put in an APN number. It would have put in an APN number, whatever. I didn't want to do that. So all of that should have been imported if we had imported it correctly. Listing period. Now, this is what agents tell me, well, that has to be the same date as the date prepared. No, it doesn't. Now, you don't want it too far in the future, but it could be. So if the seller says, well, we're not going to have it ready for showing for at least a couple of weeks, so we would like the listing to begin in a couple of weeks. Your answer should be, don't worry about it. We're not going to begin showing it until a couple of weeks. That's another part of the form. But in order for me to get going, for me to open escrow, for me to get the preliminary title report, for me to start getting all the disclosures, for me to go to work for you, in order for that to happen, you've got to hire me. So the date that we begin the listing agreement is not the date that people can start looking at your house. We'll talk about that later. Notice it says it's not to exceed 2 years. I've never taken a listing for 2 years. I took a listing once for 1 year, but and it eventually sold, but it was getting close to running out. But they would have extended it. 2 years is there's a law that says you can't do it for more than 2 years. But normally, we're not doing it for that long. How long should it be? Well, that depends on several factors. Number one, what are the average days on market for a house like this in your neighborhood? What are they? Um, uh, what what is the average days on market? Also, how realistic is the seller going to be on pricing, showing, condition, and things like that? So if they want a high price and they only want you to show it on alternate Tuesdays in a 2 hour block by appointment, and they're not going to clean or do anything, then you might want more time. Right? I've told people how I'm willing to wait, right, for us to find the right buyer. I could leave the commission into my will for my heirs. Somebody might inherit it in the future. This will be part of my estate and go on for a long time. Normally, you don't want to do more than 90 days. And my reasoning for 90 days is if you don't think that they're going to be cooperative or pricing it well enough that you can sell it in 90 days, you might want to rethink it. And we could get an extension. You could say 180 days. Say, if I tell the seller I want a 6-month listing, right? They might think that's too long. 180 days, however, that sounds better, doesn't it? Than 6 months. Does that sound better? How about this? Let's just do it for 24 weeks. How about that? How about that? But you would click on it, and I usually just do 90 to 3, pick whatever today is. Why not? Right. Did I do it 8, 9, 10, 11? Yeah, I did it right. 3 months. But that's up to you. Again, how cooperative, how flexible, whatever. What is the listing price? Right. This is a cheap Morgan Hill house. Specific listings. We used to have a mobile home listing agreement. We used to have a probate listing agreement, but 95% of all the information was the same as the one here. So you check a box and it adds an addendum. This is the magic words required by the California Civil Code in order to create a binding agreement to pay a real estate agent a commission, right? Civil Code says it's got to say something. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Compensation. So compensation to seller's broker, notice that's not selling broker, only seller's side. So we're not saying 6% and I'm going to give 3 to somebody else, or 6% and I'm going to keep 3 and I'll give, or I'll keep 3.5 and give 2.5 to somebody else. That's not what we're saying. We're saying is how much do you want to list a house? 3%, 2.5. It could be a dollar amount. Now, This is up to you. Is it, and I'm in Silicon Valley where things are crazy, right? I mean, prices, everything's crazy. Is it 4 times as hard to sell a $4 million house as a $1 million house? What do you think? Is it 4 times as hard? Is the for sale sign 4 times the size? Costs 4 times as much? Are the paperwork 4 times as long? Does it cost 4 times as much to send out the postcard in the neighborhood? The answer is no. The only thing on that list that scales is you could say, well, errors and emissions insurance, we have more liability, but what do you care, right? You're the salesperson, it's who the broker, they got E&O. So what my recommendation is not to get too hung up on the percentage, but think about how many dollars you're going to get. Would you sell a listing for $20,000? Would you do it for 30 or 40? Now, what I've had agents tell me that I would never list a house for less than 3% or less than 2.5%. Right? I don't care if it's a $4 million house. You see, a $4 million house at 2.5% is $100,000. I understand you're thinking, sweet, that'd be great. But, okay, explain to me what you're going to do that's worth $100,000. Well, I'm going to put up a for sale sign. I'm going to put the property into the multiple listing service. I'm going to use a computer program to make flyers. I'm going to have somebody take pictures. I'm going to do open houses. Ooh, wow. All right. So, and when people say, agents say to me, I would never do it for less than 2.5, I don't care how much, would you list a $800,000 condo for 3%? They would say, I would never list a house for 1.5%. I'd never do it. Right? But would you list an $800,000 condo for 3%? Yeah, of course I would. That's less money. I'm just saying it's less money. Now, if you're getting started, particularly we've been talking about farming, and this is an area where you want to get a listing. Because once you've got a listing, it's easier to get another listing. When you've got a listing, you can get buyers that are interested in your listing or somebody else's listings. There are a lot of good things that can happen if you have a listing. There's not a lot of good things that are going to happen if you don't. You'll have more time on the weekend. So think about this. When you go on a listing appointment, there's a few numbers that they're going to want. One, how much do you think the house ought to be listed for? And two, what are you going to charge? Let's just say 2.5, no more preaching, right? Or a flat fee. EXP doesn't care what you do. Additional compensation if the buyer is unrepresented. So let's say a buyer comes to me and says, I want you, the listing agent, to help me. I don't want to pay anybody anything because I'm cheap and I don't want to do it. So I don't need you to be my agent. I'm not asking you to be a dual agent. I'm just asking you to help me fill out the form and that sort of stuff. So if you were the listing agent before and it was a 5% listing, would you want 5% if you represented the buyer as well? Probably. Is it possible the owners would say, well, that's not, we were going to offer 2.5% to another agent, but it's still you and you're not really spending as much time. You're not showing houses for them. You're just writing it up. So how much you put in is up to you. I have seen 2%, 1.5%, 1%, and I've even seen $1,000 where the agent says, give me $1,000 extra and I'll do all the work for the agent who that wants to be the buyer. Now, I've been asked the question, could we work this out if there's an unrepresented agent, buyer? And the answer is sure, why not? You could leave it blank, not check anything, and then you could tell a unrepresented buyer, I'm going to have to ask to see if they want me to represent you. right? Because the seller may not want you to represent a unrepresented buyer. Neil has a question.
Okay, yeah, you did answer my my question about the unrepresented buyer and so on. And if there's no compensation at all, I don't know if you were going to get to that. The buyer doesn't want to pay you, the seller doesn't want to pay you. I was told by Debbie that you could just put their names on it, and that's it. You can put the name of the buyer, and that's it, and the address, and nothing else. You can't help them with it
On the form, you mean?
on the form. And number two, why do agents want to expire the listing on the last day of the month? It seems to be a trend for many, many years.
I haven't noticed that. I only just do 90 days.
Yeah, I know. I do too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've never tried to time it based upon where it is in the month.
Okay. In the event you said earlier that, say, example, you put it on for today, which is August 27th, but you don't meet the seller until September 3rd, and that's when you take the listing. Do you still use the 27th as the listing date or the 3rd as the listing date?
So the date prepared could be in advance. If it's too far in advance, it weirds people out. Mostly the sellers. They're like, well, wow, look at this, it's a month ago. But if it's if you're so usually the date prepared and the date the listing begins are not that far apart. And again, there's no reason for us. If I were talking to a seller today, I wouldn't want to be starting the listing in 15, 20 days. I would be saying, like I said, you need to hire me. There's a lot of work I need to do before we list it, before we launch. And we're not going to be showing the property. That comes later. But I'm going to need to open escrow. I'm going to need to get a prelim. I'm going to need to talk to the photographer. I'm going to need to talk to the stager. I'm going to need to talk to inspectors. I'm going to need to get all the disclosures together. I can't do that unless you hire me. So you're going to hire me today. That's the date the listing begins. And we're going to start showing the property probably on this day, but that's something we can modify depending on how it's going. If we're done sooner, we can do it sooner. If it's later, we can do it later.
Would you do a coming soon instead in the MLS, or would you get a different form?
So that's a very good question. And it's coming up. There's a section in the RLA about coming soon.
Okay.
Now, in MLS listing, they have a members only choice. So let's just, I know I might as well do it now because you asked. But when you put in a listing, first of all, under clear cooperation rules, within 24 hours of taking a listing, you have to tell the MLS you took a listing. Now that does, in all the MLSs, there's a choice called an exclusion. And all you do is you go to the MLS and you go to add listing, and there's a drop-down list, and you say exclusion, and it says what's the address of the property. Cool, fine, and it may ask you how long you plan on excluding it. That's all you have to do. Nobody sees copies of the listing agreement but you, your TC, and your broker. All right, the MLS doesn't get a copy, the escrow doesn't get a copy, no one's really checking. I guess the MLS has the right to, but then I've never heard them do it. So by excluding it, it's invisible to everyone, other than the MLS knows that you took a listing and you've complied with clear cooperation. Second choice is coming soon, or in MLS listings, it's called members only. And coming soon, the downside of coming soon is that Zillow and those other programs may pick it up and say, hey, this is coming soon. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Well, it keeps the days on market longer than they might be otherwise, because you haven't even started to show the property. And as soon as you show the property, it already says you've been on the market for 15 days. Right. And people are saying, wow, you've been on the market for 2 weeks, no offers. Huh. Well, we just started yesterday. That's not what Redfin says. Redfin says it's been in the MLS for 2 weeks now. If you are in MLS listings and you pick the option of members only, it doesn't get syndicated. By the way, if you're working with a buyer and you're in MLS listings, you should be telling the buyer that you can get them listings that Zillow and Redfin and Homes and Realtor.com do not have. They're called members only. They're not syndicated. No days on market starts ticking. And the members only can either be members only show or members only don't show. But this is another conversation. There's a section later in here that talks about what coming soon could do.
Thank you.
All right. So does everybody understand? By the way, as to unrepresented buyer, there's a National Association of Realtors has 179 things that an agent does to help a seller, but they also have 105 things that an agent does to help a buyer. And you might show that to the seller when you're talking about this. That do you realize that there's this and this and this and this and this and this and this, all this other stuff that I'm going to have to do in order to make sure that the buyer fills out everything, does everything on time, knows what's going on with the transaction, and I deserve to be compensated because I'm now doing two jobs. By the way, in addition to what Deborah said, is that you put their name on the form and let them fill it out themselves. I would tell them, hire a lawyer to do it for you. Why not? Right? I ain't going to do it for free. Seller won't pay me. You won't pay me. There are these things called attorney, right? That would, for a fee, be happy to help you fill out the form. Right? There you go. So this is something you probably ought to do something. Whether it's a flat fee, I want an extra grand. If I have to help the buyer fill out the forms, I want 1.5%. That's up to you. The continuation period, also known as the broker safety clause, also known as the broker protection clause, also known as the continuation period, basically says if I've been showing the property and 8 people are interested and I give you their names and then they buy it after the listing expires, you owe me a commission. See, the idea is your listing is over on Friday. You're showing property to some buyers. They're like, we really like it. We're interested. We're going to think about it over the weekend. Well, there's a problem because by Monday, your listing is expired. And what your fear is, they're going to come back. They're going to see your for sale sign is gone. They're going to go up and knock on the door. Owner opens the door and they say, what's going on? We saw the property last week. We're interested in buying it. The sign's gone. Do you still want to sell? And the owner says, come on in. Yeah, come on in. Let's talk. So if you by the way, I've been in real estate for an extremely long time. I have never heard of any agent ever collecting on this clause. And I was the vice president of an 800 agent group for 21 years. I never have heard of anyone ever collecting a dime. Because I'm just saying, right? And I have agents say, well, I want it to be 90 days. I want it to be 45 days, whatever. Type in whatever you want. No one cares. The chances that this is ever going to materialize is slim to none, but whatever. 30 days, whatever. Seller's obligation to pay previous brokers. What would that be? Well, let's say it's an expired listing. Is it possible that that previous broker turned in a list, like is mentioned in C3? You'll see later, you have to give them a written list. Do you have a list of buyers that you owe the previous broker commission for if they buy? If so, give me the list. But usually there's nothing written in here. Items included and excluded. We do this just so that it gives us some easy things to fill out. Patio furniture included. The big, palm tree in a big tub in the back, not included, excluded. None of this really matters at this point, other than it's a guide for you to put in things in the MLS. What the purchase agreement says, it doesn't matter what the listing says. It doesn't matter what the MLS says. What matters is what does it say in the residential purchase agreement that's included or excluded? That's what it says. So, but we do this just so we could, yeah, we're paying attention. That Tiffany lamp that you have, you want to take it with you. Oh, okay. All right. Leased items. If there's solar panels, you'll notice in our, forms that we have team members fill out about helping you with an offer and things like that. We ask about solar panels. I have agents ask me, why do you care? Because there are issues with solar panels. If the solar panels are leased, those leases are almost impossible to break. And they're usually recorded against the property as a personal property fixture. They're on the prelim as a fixture recorded on the property. Most of them, and what oftentimes happens is that the buyer Google searches the name of the solar power company and they find out that they have terrible reviews. And then the buyer says, well, I don't want those solar panels. And then you read the lease agreement and it says you cannot get out of this lease agreement without paying us every dime for every year that the lease was for. Give us 25 grand and we'll let you go. But otherwise, you're not getting out. So later, there's a contingency in the residential purchase agreement that says the ability, this is called leased and liened items. This is in the RPA, which we're going to do tomorrow. It says leased and liened items, and it says the buyer's willingness and ability to take over the leases and the liens is a contingency of the agreement. So we would like to know. I've sold property up in the sticks. They don't have, I remember showing buyers properties because they wanted to be, up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the first one we looked at was an open house and the listing agent was there and she said, and we have PG&E. And the buyer said to me, I said, everybody, wait, just wait. Right. And by the time we got to the top of the hill, the electricity came from propane. The refrigerator was run on propane. There was tanks, propane tanks. They had a well, and you had to use the satellite dish if you wanted Wi-Fi. So we want to know, are any of these items leased or liened? And if they say, yeah, we've leased the solar panels, or we have a loan on our solar panels, you're going to want to collect those documents because it becomes part of the disclosures. Are there smart home features, Nest, things like that are included or not? You say, well, I'm going to take that with me to our next house. Put it down, it's excluded. Again, it has to be in the purchase agreement. Property will be marketed to the following MLS. Well, I'm in MLS listings. And it's going to pull up MLS addendum, which is coming later. Don't take photographs in marketing except as required by, that's rarely done, right? Because buyers want to see pictures. If they don't see pictures, they're not going to want to see it in person. Timing of offers, two choices. One is you say, we're not going to take offers. We're going to, let's say this Friday we go live. We don't want offers till not the next Tuesday, but a week from Tuesday. We want 2 weekends of open houses. And then we're going to pick a Tuesday at noon. By the way, I would not pick Monday because the buyers are talking to their loan agents on Monday. I'd pick 10 in the morning because real estate agents don't get up early. I would say noon on Tuesday or Wednesday. That gives them time to, work on it. And I wouldn't tell the seller that we're going to go over the offers at noon on Wednesday. I would say 5 or 6 o'clock because real estate agents, they don't always get them in on time. So one option is you could say, we won't look at offers until a given day. Or you could say, as soon as we get an offer, I'm going to show it to you. If you say, we're not going to look at offers until a given day, and you put that into the MLS, and you get a preemptive, this is a new wrinkle on the preemptive. A preemptive is, it says in 2 weeks on a Wednesday, we're going to take offers, but my guy doesn't want, he's anxious. We're going to make an offer today. All cash, over list, no contingencies, take it or leave it. If you're the real estate agent, the listing agent, who put into the MLS, we're not going to look at offers for 2 weeks, and then you say, oh, too bad, we sold it already, agents have successfully filed ethics complaints. And the listing agent has been disciplined by the board of realtors. Did you know that? If you say you're not taking offers until a given day, you're not supposed to take offers until a given day. Preemptives, forget about it. Or you might be meeting your peers at a hearing at the Association of Realtors. I know Deborah Penny says she wants them all received at one time. She ain't in Silicon Valley. We usually pick a day, 2 weeks out, no, and we type in no preemptive, but that's up to you, right? And things are done differently in different areas. All right. Any questions about that? So love letters. That's what they say. It's supplemental offer letters and buyer. We call them love letters. And a love letter is a letter from the buyer with pictures of their family standing in front of the church, something like that. Saying, we're a happy, nice family, and we want to buy your house. Now, we used to do that a lot. There used to be videos with all the little children, saying what they were going to do in their room and all that other kind of stuff. Now, the problem with that is that it's trying to get the seller to make a decision on who to sell it to that might be based on protected classes. So if, for example, the seller sells it to a buyer because he likes the family or their ethnicity or their religious preference, and then one of the buyers who didn't get the house finds out later, which isn't hard to do, Zillow will tell them, that the property sold for less than what they offered, the seller's going to have to get a lawyer, right? They're going to get sued because they were discriminating based on race, color, creed, sex, national origin, marital status, ancestry, physical handicap, sexual orientation, blah, 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 right? So it is far safer to not present love letters from the buyer. So NHD is hardwired in because there's a law that says the seller has to make this disclosure. Can you uncheck it? No. Right? Why? Because the law says you have to make this disclosure. If I'm listing the property and don't tell me you can't do this in Southern California. I had a listing closed recently in San Clemente, which is in Southern California. We got a termite report. We got a property inspection. We got a prelim. We even got a roof report. If it was in an HOA, it was in 2 HOAs. It was weird. We got that. If there was a pool, I would have gotten a pool inspection. If there was a septic or sewer system, we would if you're in a county where sewer lateral requirements are, I would click all these boxes. Now, I hear, well, in San Diego, we don't do this, right? The buyer gets all the reports if the buyer wants them, but the seller doesn't provide them. The downside of not doing this is that once the buyer gets these inspections, they're going to want to renegotiate the price. It also means that the buyer cannot make a non-contingent offer. I actually, when I'm working with my team members, and I ask them, do you have a termite report? Do you have a property inspection? Do you have no, we don't have, no, the seller didn't provide any of that. My answer is good. good because we have an inspection contingency. And if you have an inspection contingency, what the inspection contingency says on the RPA, and I'm quoting, the buyer's acceptance of the condition of the property and any other matter affecting the property is a contingency of this agreement, period. That's what it says. That's a get out of escrow free card. So what happens is that if you don't do all this, then you can't expect a non-contingent offer on inspection because you don't have any of them, which means the buyer could make an offer, no loan contingency, no appraisal contingency. Doesn't that look good? Oh, yeah, but they have an inspection contingency. What do if the property doesn't appraise or they can't get the loan? They complain about something in the HOA documents and they get out because you've given them a get out of escrow free card. Oh, well, we drove by the property at night and there was a lot of rough people in the neighborhood and it was noisy. We decided not to buy it. Oh, well, we looked at the crime reports of the neighborhood and there's been a bunch of bicycle thefts and we have expensive bicycles, so we don't want to buy the house. Oh, well, we looked at the HOA documents and it says we can only have 2 pets, but we really want to get a 3rd pet, so we don't want to buy the house, right? And just anything, and they get out. Silicon Valley, you don't get away with that. Over 90% of the listings in Silicon Valley, the seller has all this stuff. Right? Because they don't want an inspection contingency. They don't want to give the buyer any room to wiggle out. They're not doing it for the benefit of the buyer. They're doing it for the benefit of the seller so that we can lock in the buyer and nail shut the escape hatches so they can't get out. I'm just saying. By the way, I represented the buyer last year on a house in Carlsbad, 1.9 million. They had all the inspections and reports. They had everything. I'm just saying I would encourage a seller to get all the inspections and reports. Exceptions to ownership and title, we normally don't write in anything there. Seller intends a contingency to purchase a replacement property. If you click that box, you have shrunk the universe of buyers because you're asking a buyer to make an offer that, if you accept it, is going to be contingent upon the seller buying another property, which they may or may not do, which means you may or may not get the house. Now, what that would mean to a seller is they're not going to get as much. There are other ways of doing this. If you're on my team, some of you might be on my team that we're already doing something like that. But there are other ways of doing it other than checking that box. But it's up to you. Key safe, lockbox, signs. If the seller says, I don't want a lockbox on the property, I don't want a key safe on the property, I don't want a sign on the property, I don't want the neighbors to know, right, that I'm selling the house. Oh, really? What are you going to do? Move at midnight? They're going to know. There are all these cars are going to be driving up and people going in and going out, and they'll think you're dealing drugs or something. Why don't we put a sign in front and let everyone know? But whatever. All right. If the harder the seller makes it to show the property and let the world know it's for sale, the less likely it's going to sell quickly and at a high price. Additional terms, if you're on my team, don't type in anything in that box without talking to me. Just saying, right? I'd like to hear what it is that you think is important as an additional term. Because normally we don't write stuff here. Here, trust advisory, there's different kinds of trusts. There's the living trust or the family trust, which is treated like a normal sale. There's a successor's trust or a vested trust, which means somebody died. If it says trust in the document that says who owns it, you check that box, right? You check that box. And by the way, when I was doing I don't know if I put in the word trust, but we would put what it says in the tax records as the name of the seller. Compensation to broker. Now, most of this here is just explaining the grid. Very few times does the seller want to go through every paragraph and ask questions. If you're on my team and you have a seller that says, I've been, up all night making questions and doing screenshots, and I want to go through all of this, make an appointment with me, and I will be happy to answer the seller's questions or take a shot at it if you want. Entity sellers, remember, if it's a trust, we would click on that box, or an LLC. Down here is a place where you would put it in. The name of the signer is, you would put it in here. You would notice when it fills out, you would be putting in the by, would be where the signature goes of the designated representative. That's the name of the trust. If you put in the name here, it puts it in here. Who's the person? Sometimes there's two, right? We don't need their address. It's not a big deal, but we don't need it. Otherwise, we don't check the box. It's just normal. Why does it say I have in 5 minutes an appointment? I guess I do. We're almost done. Broker signatures, filled it out all by itself without us having to do anything. Multiple listing service addendum. We would click on this box, make sure it has the same date as the dated part. The part of this that you're going to want to mention is the part down here. So one of it is MLS date on the internet. We rarely mark that, but concessions. I would definitely be recommending that the seller authorizes the broker to say that the seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. They're not obligated. They have to like the offer, but they're willing to consider it. Right. And this is another explanation. I'm not doing the listing appointment today. Clear cooperation applies. So this seller instructs broker D, this is 3D. At the beginning of the listing period, we typically are checking this box. And we would say, all right, well, when do you think the property is going to be ready? All right, next Tuesday, September 10th, we're going to put that in. Well, what if we're not ready by, we'll change it. What if we're ready? So we'll change that, right? We just have to have something that we put in, but you're not committed to it. We could extend it. We could shorten it whenever you're ready. I'm required to put something here. So there I did. Yeah. All right. And then that would, by the way, be the authorization to exclude from the MLS until that time period. We usually don't check these boxes. Seller concession, this box, if you're on my team and you take a listing and you don't check this box, expect that I'm going to call and ask you about it. Because what I'm hearing now is the opposite. Sellers are saying, yeah, I want to incentivize buyers to make offers and to bring them their ready, willing, and able buyers. I want their agents to do that. I want to incentivize the agents. How do I let agents know that I'm willing to do it? I'm willing to do it. How do I tell them? And there's different ways of doing it. You could send out that flyer to all the real estate agents, zip your flyer. You could use reverse prospecting. If you're on my team, talk to me. There's ways of doing it. But I would definitely check that box if you could. Most of this, we're not going to check. This says don't put photographs. We're going to do that. Seller advisory is a boilerplate thing. You can read it if you have insomnia. Broker's compensation advisory explains the different compensation things. PRBS says we being eXp Realty might list another home right down the street. I might list another home right down the street. It might be listed for less or more than what you've listed it for. It's not my fault that another eXp agent has listed the property. There's a possibility we may represent other sellers. Fair housing, there's nothing even to check here. Consumer privacy, there's nothing to check. All right, nothing to check. All right. Any questions before I have to go on to another appointment?
No, thank you, Michael.
All right. Now let me look at speaking of questions, people have chatted things. Just during the meeting, did I miss any links? Be on time, Dimitri. That's all I have to say. Oh, Angela posted it. She's nicer than I am. Solar can be transferred to the new homeowner. That's the Juan sells solar panels. Right? If you want to buy one, reach out to him. However, there are sometimes issues, isn't there, Juan, in transferring it to the new homeowner? Sometimes there's issues. But we just want to know, but it can be transferred. Smart home would be, it could be, cameras are mostly a security, Audrey. Smart homes is like Nest and things like that, where they're maintaining the temperature, and you can, turn the heater off from a distance and things like that. If both buyer and seller have independent reports done and there is a discrepancy, what happens? Elvina asked me that directly, but I'm going to answer it. Usually it's arm wrestling. You have a circle and they tie their hands together and give them each a knife. They have to work it out. And so, yeah, sometimes one termite company finds $30,000 worth of work and the other one says it's only 15, and the two of them have to, come to some decision. Where can we access the recordings? Look at my YouTube channel later. Deidre has answered that for me. One said, thank you very much. What are the ways for not mention 1031 exchange checkmark? So, the 1031 exchange checkmark, what are the other ways for not mentioning? If it's a 1031 exchange, you would check that box. At this point, we are not, by putting it in here, seller intends to purchase a replacement property as any part of this transaction. All right. So that's a longer discussion. If it's a 1031 exchange, we would use the seller's intent to exchange addendum. This contingency, the SPRP, isn't necessarily designed for a 1031 exchange. What it is, and I don't know if it loaded it, it's that let's say you're buying a house with a contingency that you have to sell your house, but you don't want to sell your house unless you can buy a house. So you put two contingencies, which means probably nothing's ever going to work. We can talk later. If it's a 1031 exchange, that's a seller intent to exchange addendum. The box that's important to check is in the MLS, and you make sure that an RPA includes the signatures on the intent to exchange addendum. I got to go. Another appointment. Bye, everybody. Tomorrow, residential.
Thank you.
Back.
Thanks, Michael.